Happy Palm Sunday. It's a privilege to be able to share God's Word. We're actually wrapping up our series going through the various idols of the heart. And so far, we've kind of covered these two idols, the idol of family as well as the idol of comfort. Well, today as we kind of wrap up this series, we'll be looking at one more idol, and that's the idol of control. And hopefully this sound feels a little loud. You can just maybe lower it. Thank you. All right, but we'll be looking at one more idol of the heart, and that's the idol of control. Now, control has always been a very tempting idol for humanity. In some ways, in the very beginning with the garden, kind of the temptation that Satan provides to Adam and Eve is almost like the temptation of control, right? You want to control how to live your life. Don't listen to God, just listen to yourself. And so control has always been a temptation for humanity. But I would venture to say that in our modern Western world, the allure of control has only grown all the more. Because there's so much in our lives that are now kind of more under our control. For example, in the past, right, if your parents were farmers, then you'd be a farmer, right? If your parents were merchants, then you would be a merchant. If your parents were pirates, then you would be a pirate, if you happen to have those kind of parents, right? There wasn't much opportunity for choosing a career for yourself. There wasn't much opportunity for social mobility. But today, the possibilities almost seem endless. I mean, here in our country, the son of a used car salesman is now the sitting president of the United States. Now, we have a lot of opportunity to shape the trajectory of our lives. Additionally, there have been lots of advancements in things like technology, medicine, the economy, that has given us a greater degree of control in our lives. Right? I know we kind of take it for granted, but it's really like magic that we can like press a few buttons on our phone, and then a stranger in a car just randomly shows up to take us wherever we want to go. Like, it's magic that we can say, hey, Alexa, and we can control the temperature in our homes. Like, we have that level of control. Even more amazingly than that, if we have some kind of illness or sickness, we have access to a variety of treatment options. In the past, if you got sick, you would most likely die, but now we have all kinds of medicines and treatment options to pick and choose from. When it comes to food, in the past, if there was a drought, that was pretty much game over. But for us today now, for the most of us, the biggest question is not like, do I have food to eat, but what kind of food do I want to eat, right? You can scroll through Yelp for like 30 minutes and look at thousands of different restaurants and choose where you want to go. Right? All these advancements have given us a greater measure of control in our lives, which for the most part is a good thing. Right? With all these advancements, we can pick and choose what we want to do, where we want to live, how we want to live. But with these advancements, though, we can also be tempted to buy into this notion that you and I, we can have absolute control over our lives. Right? We assume that we can plan out our days and map out our futures. Right? For some of us, we have our 5-year, 10-year, 20-year plans. We think to ourselves, okay, I'm going to graduate at this time. I'm going to work in this industry. I'm going to live in this city. I'm going to have kids at this age. And they're going to go to this kind of school. And we kind of map out our lives, and we feel like we can kind of control the way things will go. And we have our Roth IRAs and our 401ks that we expect to grow at a certain rate so that we can cash out by the time we are ready to retire. And again, having those things in place is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's good to plan things out. It's probably wise to have a certain direction for your life. The problem is not in making plans, but the problem is in thinking we can absolutely shape our lives in accordance with our plans. The problem is thinking that we can find our security and our hope and our future in controlling the outcome of our lives. In other words, the problem is the idol of control. And I think we do seek to idolize and obtain control in all kinds of different ways. See, for some of us, we seek to obtain control through knowledge. If I just know the right information, then I can make the best decisions and I can procure the best outcomes for myself. For others of us, we seek to obtain control, maybe not through knowledge, but through relationships. Right? It's not so much about what you know, but it's about who you know. And so as long as I can make the right kind of connections, I can leverage my network to get the kind of results that I want for my life. For some of us, we seek to obtain control through power, whether that power is persuasive or even coercive. If I can persuade others through just sheer logical argument or wow them with my sense of personal charisma, then I can get others to do what I want them to do. Or if I can coerce others through intimidation, through manipulation, through even lying to them, I can get them to do what I want them to do. Now, for others of us, we seek to obtain control through money. And we think to ourselves, if I have enough money, then I can buy myself out of any situation that I don't want to be in, or I can buy myself into any situation that I do want to be in. And for some of us, we seek to obtain control through spiritual performance. If I just read my Bible and pray hard enough and serve well enough and give enough money and tithes, then God will bless my life and answer my prayers, and he will do what I want him to do. Now, we can find ourselves pursuing the idol of control through these various ways. Now, control as an idol is particularly difficult to recognize because so often the kind of person who idolizes control just looks to be someone who's very successful. Right? They just seem like someone who is very competent, who's always on top of their things, who has life kind of all put together. And so they're the kind of person that we look to and highly praise and try to model after. They're platformed as good examples to follow after. The idolatrous pursuit of control doesn't always look so bad. But the idol of control is deeply problematic because it leads to a deep delusion. See, the idol of control deludes us into thinking that we are God. The idol of control deludes us into thinking that we are God. When we've idolized control, we begin to imagine that we're self-sufficient, that I'm in control, I know how to live life, and I don't really need God. And we start to take credit for all of our success. We start to attribute all of our success in life to our wisdom, to our knowledge, to our diligence, to our hard work, to our own planning. We begin to think that we can make things happen, that we can secure the good life for ourselves. And so we fall into this deep delusion thinking that we are God. A biblical example of this kind of deep delusion is seen with King Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 4. There at the time, Nebuchadnezzar was the ruler of the greatest empire in the ancient Near East, the Babylonian Empire. Now, one day, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream of a tree that it is chopped down. And he's very perplexed. He's very confused about what this dream could mean. And so he asks Daniel, who's serving as one of his royal wise and one of his royal counselors, hey, can you interpret this dream for me? Well, Daniel interprets this dream for King Nebuchadnezzar, and he says, well, I have some bad news for you, king. This dream is foreshadowing how one day you will be cast out from your kingdom, and you'll be forced to live like an animal for a period of time, until you recognize that it's ultimately God who controls the kingdoms of the earth. It's ultimately God who gives the kingdoms to various rulers and kings. It's ultimately God who is in control. Well, instead of taking this interpretation to heart and humbling himself, Nebuchadnezzar instead doubles down on his own sense of control. And it says in Daniel chapter 4, verse 29 to 30, it says, at the end of 12 months, a year has passed since he's had this dream and this interpretation. At the end of 12 months, King Nebuchadnezzar was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. He's looking out at all that he has, his beautiful, magnificent city, his power, his wealth, this splendor. And the king answered, and he said, is not this the great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty? Right? Nebuchadnezzar was told by Daniel that it's ultimately God who gives the kingdoms of the earth to whomever he wishes. It's ultimately God who's in control. But here, Nebuchadnezzar looks at all that is before him, the city, the kingdom, his power, his wealth. He sees it all and he attributes it to himself. He sees all these things as coming from his own hand, and in a very real sense, he believes that he is God. And that's the deep delusion that the idol of control brings to our lives. And like Nebuchadnezzar, we too can fall trapped to this deep delusion as well. Now, I would venture to say that none of us here in this room would verbally profess that we are God. But here's the thing. See, when we idolize control, what we truly believe at the bottom of our hearts is that if we were in control, we'd actually do a better job than God. If my plans came to fruition, then my life would turn out exactly the way that I wanted to. Right? If I could carry out life to the way that I want it to turn out, then I will maximize my joy, my satisfaction, my success, and my comfort. Life would actually be a lot better if I called the shots. Life would run more smoothly if my plans came to fruition. Life would be more enjoyable if I took the place of God and if I was in control. See, that's the delusion of the idolatry of control. Now, there's a dark side to this delusion. See, while the idol of control seems to promise a flourishing life, hey, if you're in control, you can manage life exactly the way that you want it. While it promises this illusion of fulfillment and satisfaction, the idol of control inevitably leads to two miserable outcomes. And the first miserable outcome of idolizing control is actually anxiety. Now, that might seem counterintuitive because, after all, if you're in control, then you can manage life the way that you want it to turn out. We imagine that being in control, picking and choosing things for ourselves, would bring a greater depth of freedom and assurance. We don't have to be bound by anyone else's opinions or annoyances. We don't have to, we can just chase after all the desires of our hearts and pursue whatever we want to pursue. But the reality is that we actually grow more anxious when we are the ones who are solely responsible for figuring out life. Right? We start to feel this overwhelming pressure to get everything right, to make the right decisions in a vast sea of possibilities. And that leads to a very weighty question. What if I choose wrong? Out of all the options that I can choose from, what if I make the wrong choice? What if I chose that career instead of this career? What if I chose to date that person instead of this person? What if I chose to send my kids to that school instead of this school? What if I chose to live in that city instead of this city? What if I chose wrong? And instead of feeling freedom, we end up agonizing over every option. We second guess every decision. We have this nagging fear of missing out. When the full weight of being in control falls squarely on our shoulders, we end up being crushed by anxiety. That's the first miserable outcome of pursuing this idol of control. Now, the second miserable outcome of idolizing control is isolation. See, when we seek after control as an idol, we end up pushing everyone else away. When we idolatrously pursue control, people inevitably become one of two things. People either become obstacles to avoid, or they become opportunities to exploit. It's always going to be one of two things. If you are pursuing after control as an idol, people will always become either an obstacle to avoid, or they will become opportunities to exploit. Now, as an obstacle to avoid, people just get in the way of you trying to control your life. Right? Your kids do not listen to you. Your coworkers do not get on your plan. Your spouse is just not on the same page, and so they are a hassle. They're annoying to deal with, and so you eventually want to avoid them and cut them out of your life. They're obstacles to avoid. Get out of my face because I'm trying to do my life in the way that I want it to, and you're annoying me right now. Now, on the flip side, as opportunities to exploit, people are simply a means to an end in our quest for control. And so we end up using them, manipulating them, intimidating them. We end up even abusing them. And once they no longer serve a purpose that meets our ends, we end up cutting them out of our lives. See, at the end of the day, we find ourselves all alone. We've pushed out all the people around us in our pursuit of control as an idol. See, the idol of control promises a flourishing life, but in the end, it inevitably leads to anxiety and isolation. And that's what we see with Nebuchadnezzar. After King Nebuchadnezzar proudly proclaims his mastery over life and his kingdom, he is driven out of his kingdom and cast out to live like an animal. Now, commentators have kind of different takes on this. Some commentators say that this language of living like an animal is referring to the fact that Nebuchadnezzar literally became like an animal, that he was driven by paranoia and anxiety, right? Psychosis, this kind of condition known as zoanthropy, where a human being thinks of themselves as literally an animal. Some commentators think that. Now, other commentators say that this is a figurative way of describing someone who has been cast out of society. Right? They're all alone because during that time, describing someone as an animal was a figurative way of saying that they are now thrown out of society. But either way, the most powerful man in the world at that time is removed from the throne, and his idolatrous pursuit of control has led only to anxiety and isolation. See, that's the dark side to this delusion. So then what's the solution to the problem of idolizing control? Right? How do we avoid going down this deluded path that only leads to anxiety and isolation? Well, the solution to the idol of control is to trust in the one who is actually in control. The solution to the idol of control is to trust in the one who is actually in control. Instead of frantically grasping for control for ourselves, we have to realize that God is in control, that God is sovereign. Now, what does it mean for God to be sovereign? What does it mean for God to be in control? We're wading into some deep theological waters here. Lots of debate has happened over the millennia of Christian history. But let me just try to give a very brief and simplified overview of the sovereignty of God. I'm not going to be able to cover everything. I'm not going to be able to answer all the objections of how God's sovereignty interacts with human free will and all of that. But three things I just want to highlight here about what the Bible has to say about the fact that God is indeed in control. See, first, God's sovereignty means that, number one, God supervises all things. That means that every square inch of all creation is found within his sovereign hands. God's authority extends to the entire universe. There's nothing too big, nothing too small that escapes his loving and kind attention. We see this in Psalm 135, verse 6, where it says, "Whatever the Lord pleases, he does, in heaven and on earth, in the seas and in all the deeps." That's a way of saying, in all of creation, in the entire universe, God supervises all things. What that means is that God exercises control over all creation. He's the one who causes the grass to grow. He's the one who brings the rain to fall. He's the one who causes the sun to rise. But not only does God exercise control over the natural world, but the Bible also says that God also has control over seemingly random events. Proverbs 16 says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord." And the reason why you have not won the lotto yet is because God has not willed for you to win the lotto just yet. Right? For all the people that go to Vegas, they roll the dice. Even the numbers that show up on the dice fall under the sovereignty of God. Even seemingly random things are under God's control. God also has control over the nations. In Psalm 22, it says, "For dominion belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nation." What that means is God determines the rise and fall of kingdoms. God determines who gets to be president. God determines who gets to be king. God draws the boundaries of countries and civilizations. God has control over the nations. And God not only controls the big things of life, the big things of the universe, but he also covers even the smallest of details. Right? Jesus teaches us that our Heavenly Father feeds the birds of the air. He clothes the lilies of the field. He knows the number of hairs on our heads. God's sovereignty extends to all things. There is not a single thing in the entire universe that escapes God's careful and loving attention. He supervises all things. Secondly, God's sovereignty means that God sustains all things. God is actively at work in upholding our world and upholding our lives. He providentially keeps everything going. In Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 17, it says, "He," referring to Jesus, "he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together." God sustains all things. Now, some people say, okay, if there is a God, God is kind of like a watchmaker who brings in all the pieces together. He creates the watch, winds it up, sets it up, has it right, and then he walks away. God's not involved in our everyday lives, right? He's just kind of doing his own thing somewhere over there. He's not really paying attention to what's happening here. But that's not how the Bible describes God's sovereignty. That's not how the Bible describes his ongoing involvement in creation. The Bible says God is actively sustaining all things. See, the reason why things don't just disintegrate and fall apart is because God is holding all things together. Even now, God is doing 1,000 things to keep us alive, to have the blood flowing in our veins, to have the earth spinning in its orbit, to have the ground from just opening up and swallowing us alive. He is sustaining us. He's sustaining everything. God sustains all things. That is his sovereignty at work. Lastly, God's sovereignty means that God succeeds in all things. God accomplishes his good purposes, and nothing can thwart his plans. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 24 says this, "The Lord of hosts has sworn, as I have planned, so shall it be. And as I have purposed, so shall it stand." God will do what he has set out to do, and nothing will thwart his plans. Now, we may ask, but wait a minute, Josh, what about evil? I mean, I don't know if you have noticed, but look at the world around us. There is all kinds of things that are wrong with our world. And the reality is, yes, we do live in a fallen world. We do live in a world where evil is a reality. And so does that mean that God has failed? Well, not so. I don't think so. See, the Bible shows us that even out of great evil, God will succeed in accomplishing his good purposes. And the greatest example and proof of that is seen at the cross. See, the greatest evil to have ever happened in human history was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. But out of the greatest evil ever comes the greatest good for us. Nothing can thwart the plans of God. He will work through any and every situation to accomplish his good purposes because he succeeds in all things. Right, so the sovereignty of God means that God alone is the one who is truly in control. He supervises all things, he sustains all things, and he succeeds in all things. And resting in the sovereignty of God is the solution to our idolatrous pursuit of control. Instead of trying to grasp control for ourselves, we can rest in the one who is actually in control. See, because God supervises all things, we can rest assured knowing that nothing falls outside the bounds of his sovereign hands. Every aspect of our lives, from the biggest decisions that we make to the smallest of details that we think about, all of it falls under his loving sovereignty. Our lives are in his hands, every moment of it. And so we need not fear. Also, because God sustains all things, we can rest assured knowing that God will provide all that we truly need for life. We don't need to worry about securing things for ourselves. We will never lack anything we truly need because God will graciously and generously provide that for us. His sovereignty is a sustaining sovereignty. And because God succeeds in all things, we can rest assured that God is always carrying out his good purposes through our lives. Even when those things happen that make us scratch our heads, even when life does not go according to plan, we can rest assured knowing that God knows exactly what he's doing. His plan has not been thwarted. Your plans may have been, but his plans have not. He's working all things together for your good and for his glory. And so as we rest in the sovereignty of God, that frees us from the anxiety and the isolation that comes with seeking after control for ourselves. Now, hear me clearly. This does not mean that we can just sit back, relax, and do nothing. It doesn't mean that we just kind of, all right, God, you're in control. I'm not going to put any effort. It does not mean that we stop making plans or wisely weigh out decisions. But it does mean that we don't have to bear the burdensome weight of thinking. It all depends on me. My world runs on me. We don't have to anxiously stay up at night trying to craft the perfect plan. We don't have to get frustrated with our children or our coworkers or our spouse or unexpected situations that derail our plans. No, we can be free from the idol of control as we trust in the one who is truly in control, like he's actually in control. We can trust in him. And so as we kind of wrap up, I just want to share one closing application to help us avoid pursuing the idol of control. This might be a little bit surprising, but this application is simply the spiritual discipline of keeping Sabbath. Keep Sabbath. Now, to put it very simply, Sabbath is a weekly practice, a weekly pattern, where we intentionally press pause on the busyness of our lives that so often drive us to seek after control. We've got a million things on our plates, 1,000 different responsibilities constantly running in the back of our mind. And in the midst of this whirlwind of chaos where we try to control it all by planning and doing all these things, God invites us to rest. He's saying, trust me. I got this. I know you feel like that if you stop, your world will crumble and fall. But that's exactly why you need to rest. You need to know that I'm God. You're not. I'm in control. You're not. And I got you. See, the practice of keeping Sabbath helps us to put aside the normal hustle and bustle of our busy lives, and we recenter our hearts, our minds, our lives, our rhythms on God through worship and rest, through recreation and enjoyment. We simply enjoy God and his good gifts and rest once again in his sovereign provision. Again, the practice of keeping Sabbath really boils down to the question of trust. Do I trust God enough that I can take this time away and my world will not crumble because he's the one who's upholding my world? All right, do I trust God enough that he will provide for me and my family? Am I going to trust that God is truly sovereign? We're going to trust that he is truly in control. See, as we rest, we're reminded of the fact that God cares far more about what happens to our lives than we ever could. And as we enjoy his good gifts, we are refreshed in the reality that we get to rest in his sovereign hands, and that starts to loosen the tight grip that control has on our hearts. And for me personally, this has been such an important practice, especially as I have now become a parent. Now, I will openly confess, I am a control freak. This sermon is for me, right? It's not for you. This sermon is for me. I love to control things. I need to control things. I am a control freak. But this tendency to want to control things has really come into conflict with the reality of parenting. See, when you become a parent, you realize, oh man, I am not in control. Right? Before Caleb, I prided myself in keeping a very orderly schedule. I prided myself in having a very clean home, but now all those things are out the window. Now that Caleb is here, I cannot go where I want to go. I cannot do things that I want to do. I cannot sleep when I want to keep sleeping, right? If Caleb is up, okay, I guess I'm up too, right? Like, he kind of impacts my sense of being in control. Parenting has revealed just how much I idolize control and how much I don't have control. Yet, nevertheless, in my stubborn foolishness, I still try to control things, especially when it comes to Caleb's nap schedule. Babies have this thing called wake windows. If you're not a parent, maybe you're not as familiar with this. But wake windows are this optimal period of time where babies need to be awake before they go down for the next nap. Now, the reason why this is so important is because if you miss this crucial wake window, this sliver of time, if it's too small, then the baby will be what they call undertired. They won't be sleepy enough, and so they'll have a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep. Now, if this wake window is too long, they are what they call overtired, and so they're too stimulated. They have cortisol running through their bodies, and so they have a hard time falling asleep and staying asleep. And so if you're too short, if you're too long, then it's game over, right? They're not going to nap. Now, if babies don't nap well, they don't sleep well at night. And if they don't sleep well at night, then I don't sleep well at night. And if I don't sleep well at night, then I am a miserable, cranky, angry kind of person. And so I felt it deep in my soul, the need to control my son's nap schedule. And so early on, I went deep down the rabbit hole of learning all about baby sleep. Right? All these influencers, all these bloggers, I read everything there is to read about baby sleep. Right, taking care of babies, right, little Z's, precious little sleep, right, mommy wise, all these things. Right? I was like in all these Facebook groups, I was on Reddit threads, I was on blog posts, I was like watching Instagram reels. At a certain point, the Instagram algorithm for my account was like church stuff, like basketball content, and like influencer moms. Like that was like all that was showing up on my feed because I spent so much time looking up all this baby stuff, and it was not good for my soul. See, I somehow got this notion that I could perfect Caleb's nap schedule so that I could make sure that he would sleep well. And so I went about seeking to control every aspect of his life. When he would wake up, when he would go down, how much he would play, how much light was in the room, like what he would eat, what he would drink. I would keep his nap schedule like a hawk. My control freak tendencies went out the roof. Well, all this came into a head when it was time to bring Caleb to church. Because here's the thing. His nap schedule does not work with Sunday services. Like, he's supposed to be napping right now. Like, it does not work at all. Taking him to church jacks up his wake windows. It ruins this perfect schedule that I've crafted for him. Now, you would think that as a pastor, I'd be the one pushing for my family to prioritize church and worship and Sabbath. But I struggled so much to let go of control. In fact, I remember there was a point where I looked to my wife and I asked her, hey, do you just want to stay home on Sundays and like have Caleb nap and you can just watch the live stream? And my wife was like, are you serious, bro? I'm going to church. You can stay, you can watch Caleb, but I'm going to church. But I'm so thankful that my wife really pushed us as a family to prioritize Sabbath, to prioritize worship, to prioritize rest in this way. Because this weekly pattern of rest and worship is far more important than trying to control my son's nap schedule. Yes, he has some terrible naps on Sundays, right? His naps are usually short on Sundays. But what our hearts need, even more than being in control, is to rest in the one who is truly in control. To look to God and say, okay, God, my son's in your hands. He's always been. I just need to recognize that. And that's been so life-giving in this season of parenting, where there is such an idolatrous desire to seek control. See, when we gather together as the people of God to hear the truth of God, to sing these songs to God, to experience the mercy and grace and faithfulness and presence and love and kindness of God, our hearts are refreshed. Sabbath is so crucial for combating the idol of control. So take up God's invitation to come and rest, to be reminded, hey, it's okay that you're not in control. It's okay that your plans are not going to fruition. It's okay because I got this. I got you. You can let go of a burden that was never meant for you to bear. So church, as we are confronted with this idol of control, this idol of the heart, instead of grasping for control, may we rest and trust in the one who is truly in control. And we trust that Jesus offers us a better way to live, not a frantic way where we try to seize control for ourselves, but a way in which we trust the one who is truly in control and find true rest for our souls. So may we trust in God who is sovereign, who supervises all things, who sustains all things, and who succeeds in all things. Let's rest in the one who is truly in control. If you can bow your heads with me at this time, we'll spend some time in prayer and reflection as we respond to God's word together. Maybe like me, you are a control freak. And maybe it's not in the realm of parenting. Maybe it shows up in your work. Maybe it shows up with your spouse. Maybe it shows up with your home, different hobbies, activities, whatever it might be. You come to a place of surrender, of laying down your tightly held plans before the one who is actually in control. So take this time to rest once again in his sovereignty, to really know that, man, you're in his hands. He's got you. The sovereign God of the entire universe who oversees every square inch of all creation holds you in his hands. And so there's no need to fear. There's no need to strive. There's no need to be anxious. There's no need to frustratingly seek after control for yourself. You can, freely receive the life that he gives to you, trusting that he is truly the one who is in control. So would you take this truth to heart as we reflect on God's word together? Let's take a moment to reflect and respond in